Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody had a good week last week. I hope things are going your way. I got some things I want to talk about that I'm reading. The verse I'm reading out of is from Paul. It's to the Corinthians. It's in 2 Corinthians, but I'd like to tell a story first about in chapter 4, John chapter 4. We hear of a story. We read about a story rather about a Roman government official, and he has a sick son. And his son's fixing to die on him, and he's lost about this, and I'm sure, I don't know the situation, from that in depth, but I'm sure the man felt like things weren't going his way. I'm sure the man was at his wit's end, he's at the end of his rope, and he didn't understand what was going on. But this man walks 20 miles to where Jesus is, and he goes to Jesus, and he talks to Jesus, and he asks him, he says, my son's sick, can you heal my son? And he talks about, the Bible talks about him talking to Jesus, and Jesus tells him, your son isn't going to die, your son's going to be fine. And so this man has faith that Jesus is who he says he is, and he trusts that he's going to do what he says he's going to do. And that this guy had to have felt, obviously he thought Jesus was, or he knew who Jesus was. Obviously he knew Jesus, in his heart, he knew Jesus was who he says he was. So he felt, I'm sure he felt, if this guy is who he says he is, then why are these bad things happening to me? Why is this going on in my life? So he had to feel that way. Now, I'm not sure where this man was at spiritually. I'm not sure if this man had total trust before this situation, but I'm sure he did afterwards, And so Jesus tells him he's healed. Go ahead and go back. Your son's fine. And so this man's going back, and to reaffirm that Jesus did, what he said he was going to do, this guy meets some people on the road back to 20 miles to his house, and they tell him, hey, your son's healed. He's good to go. He's fine, And so he asked these people, well, when did my son get better? And they tell him, yesterday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, that's right on. That's right when he was talking to Jesus, and Jesus told him, hey, your son's going to be healed. So that just proved to this man that Jesus was who he says he was. And that's what's going to happen in our life. Now, we're going to feel, the same things. Now, not all of us will feel that kind of pain. Not all of us will go through that, but God's going to send us through our own trials, and we're going to all feel abandoned. We're all going to feel left alone, and it's going to happen at some time. Life isn't always rosy. That's life. That's just how it is. Just because you're a Christian and you give your life to Christ doesn't mean that it's a bed of roses from that point on. Things are going to happen. That's a fact of life. I mean, that doesn't sound that great. It may sound a little depressing, but knowing that we have Christ on our side to help us through that, we have the tools to get through these things. And when we get through them, it's just going to continue to build our faith. Our faith, the more we use it, the bigger it gets. And so that's what happened with that man. And so I'm reading this in 2 Corinthians, which is where I got the verse. And it's from Paul, a letter from Paul to the Corinthians. And it's chapter 4, verse 8. And it says, we are pressed on every side by troubles, but we are not crushed. We are perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. And that's who we are. That's what we have. That's the trust that we have as Paul writes these. He was going through a lot of other things, and his trials that he was going through at this time were a lot more intense than probably what we're going through. But nonetheless, that's what we can apply that to our life. We can apply that to what he's telling us, and what we're going through in life. We're pressed on every side by troubles, but we're not crushed. And I know a lot of us are going through troubles, and a lot of us feel like we go through troubles all the time. We're pressed on all those, but we got to hear what Paul says. We get knocked down, but we're not destroyed. We have faith that Christ is, like the guy in chapter 4 of John. We have faith that God is who he says he is and does what he says he does. And the more we trust in God, and the more we trust in him and we hear him, the bigger our faith is going to grow, and the more we're going to be able to use our faith, if that makes sense. But we have to make sure we're doing what we're doing. We have to stay in our prayers, and we have to stay in our Bible so God can show us these things and he can speak to us about these things. And so I'd like to just give that hope and encouragement to all those that are out there today. You may seem like, things aren't going my way, and I feel like I'm abandoned. I feel like Jesus has turned his back on me. Well, he hasn't. Okay, I just trust me, he hasn't. And when you come through this, if you do what you're supposed to do, if we do what our part is, God's going to use that to build our faith. So don't give up hope. Realize that we may get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. That's from Paul. I feel like Paul probably had some pretty good knowledge on things. So I would like to use that and encourage everyone this week. If you're going through things and things seem like they're not going your way and you don't understand what it's going to be, just remember, we may be crushed on all sides, but we have a light at the end of the tunnel. We got to keep the main thing. Stay focused and trust that God is who he says he is. I hope everybody has a good week. Keep praying for our country. Pray for our nation. Pray for our leaders. And I hope everybody has a good week this week, and I'll talk to y'all next week.